You're not going to want to miss this episode of the AI Show. We're going to talk all about scaling your AI ML practices with ML Ops and Azure Machine Learning. Part 3, the practical bits with my friend Scott. Make sure you tune in. Hello and welcome to this episode of the AI Show. We're talking all about scaling your AI ML practices with ML Ops and Azure Machine Learning. This is part 3 where we get into some actual code. Is that right, Scott?
That's right.
Fantastic. Well,
Uh,
why don't you tell us who you are and what you do before we get started?
I am Scott Donohoo. I'm a cloud solution architect in our AI specialized CSA group at Microsoft and part of the team that has built this solution accelerator over the past year and a half.
That is amazing. Look, for people who don't know, I work in the product group, and people like Scott do the actual work to make these products work for customers, which is amazing. I know it's a little inside baseball, but I just want you to know how awesome these folks are. So we talked in part 1 to Abe about some general MLOps principle. In part 2, we talked to Setu about the accelerator. I was hoping maybe we could dive in and see how we could take these accelerators and put them into practice. Can we do that?
You bet.
Fantastic. So, just a review from the past 2 things that we talked about. Can you give us a little review?
Sure. In part one, um, Abe talked about the overall MLOps story and what we're doing here at Microsoft. In part two, Setu talked about the MLOps Solution Accelerator, how much success we've had with it with our customers, where we're trying to go with it. And so now for part three, I want to give a little bit of a look at what that accelerator looks like and how it works for you.
All right, let's dive in. Let me share your screen.
Great. Okay, so what we're looking at here is the homepage repo for the Azure MLOps V2 Solution Accelerator. This is open source and public, so anyone can use it. And what it attempts to do is to create a project factory so that you can easily bootstrap new ML projects with end-to-end pipelines and data flows already built for you so that you can quickly get started. Um, the Once the accelerator can be used either with Azure DevOps or in GitHub for source code management, pipeline management, and workflows. So what I'm going to show here is an example that I've built using this accelerator that is in Azure DevOps. So once this solution accelerator is set up in your project and your organization in Azure DevOps, you'll have available to you a pipeline called Initialize Project. And when I run this pipeline manually, I can select all the characteristics of the project that I want to build. So I want to give a new project name, or the project name I'm going to pull all these MLOps templates from, a new project name for my repository, my ML project itself, the set of templates to use, and I can specify some other characteristics of my project. For instance, ML project type of classical, so typical ML workflow with tabular data, computer vision workflow, and natural language processing. As well, I can select the interface to Azure Machine Learning that I prefer to use. So the Azure ML CLI v2, Python SDKs v1 and v2, and our responsible AI CLI as well.
I mean, this is really cool. So, if I'm understanding this right, you clone the repo,
Mhm.
and then you get you could do it in GitHub Actions. You decided to do Azure DevOps, which is awesome in either case. But there's going to be some pipelines that you run that's going to set everything up according to the principles that were described in the previous videos.
That's right.
Okay, and so what you're putting in here is just the custom names of the things you want to do, up to and including the project type. Is that correct?
That's right. And based on the project type, you will get a different set of template pipelines and sample data provided in your project to work with so that you can
Oh
get an
my goodness.
understanding of what those flows look like.
Yeah, that's really cool. That one of the biggest challenges that I found when I'm explaining this stuff or using this stuff is people are like, I just want to get my hands into the pod and start mixing things around. but you've basically brought all the ingredients for an entire meal in this case.
Trying to and working, improving that meal as we go.
I love it. All right, keep showing us.
So the next, or the last parameter of creating your project is you can select the preferred infrastructure provider, either Bicep or Terraform. And I'll get into some of the aspects of how these are divided up in the project. So once I've selected all this, I would click Run to execute this pipeline. And this Azure DevOps pipeline will bootstrap my actual ML project. When that is complete, I'll wind up with something like this. And as might have been mentioned in part two, we try to make this accelerator modular and flexible so that it was easy to modify and also had a separation of concerns for the people that are often involved in MLOps. So we talk about MLOps processes, and people. Well, a lot of those people have different skill sets, different roles. Data scientists, data engineers, ML engineers, and IT. So the form of the projects that's bootstrapped for you is we've got sample data, in this case for a taxi regression example.
Mhm.
The data scientist would be concerned with the code that is under the data science directory. So we've got the source code for preparing data, training a model, evaluating the model, and registering it in Azure Machine Learning, as well as defining the environment that we need for all of those phases of our pipeline. Infrastructure defines, either in Bicep or Terraform, the complete Azure ML environment that we want to be able to deploy and the pipeline, in this case, an Azure DevOps pipeline for deploying it. So your IT group may be more concerned with what's in this directory here. And then under MLOps, we have both the DevOps pipelines for CI/CD, so deploying the model training pipeline into Azure ML, and optionally deploying either an online managed endpoint in Azure ML or a batch managed endpoint in Azure ML. These are pipelines that are run from Azure DevOps, and what they deploy into Azure ML are the actual Azure ML pipelines. So we've got a training pipeline that registers data, um, runs on compute, and registers the model. And then we've got a deployment pipeline for both cases of either batch or online.
I mean, this is it really is the soup to nuts kind of experience with everything in there, and it's really cool that it has the data, the pipelines both for running it outside of Azure Machine Learning and for running the machine learning pipelines, which are different things. What does this look like? Is there like a you? How do you run this to get actual artifacts produced?
Right. So the next step after having bootstrapped this project repository in Azure DevOps would be to configure the environment I actually want to deploy for Azure Machine Learning. And
I
to
see.
do that, I would edit this file here, infra prod, and I can specify some of the characteristics of the environment that I want. I give it a namespace, a postfix. This could be a number or a string, the Azure ML region I want to deploy to, and what I want to use to represent where this particular environment fits in my overall MLOps practice. So I can deploy this 3 times from different branches of this repo to create a prod environment, a dev environment, a test or staging environment, and so forth. I can
Interesting.
also ask it to configure to pre-create a compute cluster for me so that I can just go straight into running a training pipeline. So once I've done this, then I would first deploy um, the infrastructure pipeline. And when that pipeline is run, it's deploying an Azure ML workspace for me, along with all of the other assets that I need to run my Azure ML pipelines. And so when this pipeline is complete, I will have my Azure ML pipeline, and I'm ready to run training and run deployment.
That's cool. As part of the infrastructure pipeline, is it just creating the workspace or is it doing more than that?
Deploying the Azure ML workspace, the deployment just creates the workspace,
Right.
and
Okay.
it could be enhanced to add other assets that might be associated with the particular project in mind.
I see. Okay, cool.
So now that I have my Azure ML workspace deployed, I would run my model training pipeline. Now, the model training pipeline does quite a bit. It creates the compute cluster, it trains the model, tests the model against some test data, and registers the model in Azure ML,
Hmm,
as well as registering the data set that we're operating on. So if we go into the workspace, after that pipeline has been run, I can see that I've got my taxi data is registered as a data asset. The pipeline has been registered and published. I've got an environment that contains all of the Python packages and the base image that I need to do the training for my particular model.
I see.
And when that training is complete, it will register the model as an MLflow model. So at this point, we're done. And we can get to this point in about a half hour or 45 minutes.
That's cool. And so the first pipeline sets up the workspace. The second pipeline sets up all of the attendant assets that you would need to run this job, up to and including running a machine learning job and creating the model in a Azure machine learning pipeline.
That's correct.
Okay, cool. This is cool.
And then lastly, we have optionally, we can choose to deploy that MLflow registered model as an online managed endpoint or a batch endpoint in Azure ML. In this case, I've done both. So I can look at the endpoints that I have available to me, and I've got some sample data in the repo. So if I put some sample data in here, we have a live endpoint with that model deployed, and we can put in data and get back results.
That's cool. And you so this is a look, we're all amongst friends here. You said you could do this all in like a under an hour?
I would say under an hour. So the nuts and bolts parts of it are just setting up the credentials necessary to generate the project and to deploy the Azure ML assets. So some service principles basically.
Well, I mean, this is impressive. Is there anything else to show us, or do you? Where can people go and get this stuff?
The place to go is to start at Azure MLOps V2.
Hmm.
We have a deployment guide for what I just showed
Hmm.
right here that will help you get started.
So this link that I put up, this link that you gave me is this solution accelerator that has all of this goodness that you just showed. Is that right?
That's correct.
That is amazing. Well, my friend, thank you so much, so much for this. Are people using this? Are you getting some traction?
They are, and it's increasing. Yeah, from part two, I think Set2 had some good examples in customer use cases.
I know, but it's like these are your babies, and you got to be proud of them too. So thank you
Yeah,
so much
definitely.
for thank you so much for being with us, my friend.
Thanks, Seth.
Awesome. We've been learning all about scaling your AI ML presence with ML Ops and Azure Machine Learning Part 3. This was with Scott, where he showed us how it actually works. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you next time. Take care.